If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming somebody I've known for over 25 years, Mark Hunter, also known as the Sales Hunter. Mark is one of the most influential voices in sales and marketing, a CSP certified speaker and the best-selling author of A Mind for Sales, High Profit Prospecting, and High Profit Selling. Through his work, Mark has helped countless businesses build confidence in their sales process, identify better prospects, and close deals with integrity, all while fostering long-term customer relationships. But what I admire most about Mark isn't just his expertise in sales, it's his ability to lead through courage, and to have conversations that are tough and to show up authentically in every interaction. In today's episode, we're diving deep into one of the hardest leadership challenges, the moving on conversation. From firing employees to navigating tough career transitions, Mark shares his personal experiences and insights on how to handle these moments with grace, clarity, and respect. And trust me, you do not want to miss his stories, including one that involves a surprising reaction to a layoff and another that might just make you rethink how you approach tough talks in your own career. Please welcome Mark, the Sales Hunter, to the Small Brave Moves podcast. Mark, welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast. I'm just so excited and grateful to have you on the podcast, especially since we've known each other for just a few years.
Which is really scary that even though you've known me for probably about 25 years, that you still asked to have me on there. Wow.
We often talk, we were just babies when we first met, like young, very young in our careers, making small, brave moves all over the place, of course. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're most proud of creating right now.
Yeah, what I'm most proud of creating is, I'm known as the Sales Hunter. And it's a brand I created because when you got the last name of Hunter, no, I did not change it, and you're in sales, you might as well figure out a way to incorporate it. So through all of our market research, we found that the Sales Hunter resonated the most. The domain name was available. So that's why we became thesaleshunter.com. What am I most proud of? The ability for me to influence and impact as many people as I get to do every day, every week through my online activity, through videos, LinkedIn posts, speaking at conferences, and so forth. I never thought that I'd be able to have such a big impact. So yeah, that's kind of a brave move, which is really awesome considering the brave move began because as a kid, I stuttered. I stuttered profusely as a little kid.
Really?
Yeah. I would not get up in front of a crowd at all. So for people to see what I'm doing now, like, you've got to be kidding me. So that was a brave move. It took years to kind of overcome that. In fact, when I was in college, I would not even attend the first day of class because that might be the one day that you might have to say your name. And I do that. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And I think, Mark, when I think about you, so I obviously didn't know you when you were going through that challenge, right?
Through that challenge.
Well, a few years later, when I met like this confident leader who wasn't afraid to have the tough conversations with people he led. And so I want you to think about what was one of the most toughest conversations you've had in your career with those that you've led.
Well, getting my wife to say yes to marry me. That would be, yeah. Well, anyway, 44 years later, we are still married. So that's cool. Some tough conversations, firing people. I mean, terminating people and terminating people when it was just simply a downsizing. And you literally, and one in particular, I remember because we were in the midst, I was with a company before I knew you at ConAgra. I had an assistant, very capable manager. In fact, he was in kind of a grooming role. We were grooming him to become a leader in the company. And he was off doing almost a motivational meeting with some of our field salespeople. And the order had come down that we had to do a 15% cut in people. And all the phone calls would be made at the exact same time on one day. And I remember he was in Chicago. I was in New York. And it was 10 o'clock. I said, be in your room at 10 o'clock. And I had to tell him, I said, I hate to say this, but you are let go. And you've got 2 weeks, and then we'll have a severance package. And what was amazing was he was so classy about it. He went right back downstairs to the meeting, continued the meeting, having the motivational program with all the salespeople. And it was amazing. And yet what's funny is some of those people in that same room had received phone calls too from their managers that they were let go, and they were all bent out of shape. And they thought, wait a minute, this guy is a real stud to be able to, no, he's been let go, yet he is staying in the game, making the game happen. So that was kind of a tough conversation for me to have, but to see how he carried it out, absolutely proud of him.
So in the 5 tough talks, we talk about the fifth one, the most difficult one is the moving on conversation, right? And having to close that chapter. And I have found, similar to what you're talking about, and I want to unpack this conversation a little bit more, is when we really prepare and bring everything to that conversation, it changes how most times the outcome of how they are feeling, right? What they're hearing and how they're reacting. And I'll never forget at ConAgra, one of the first downsizings we had to do, unfortunately, was I remember just going in. We had done all the prep, right? And here it is the night before and then the morning of. And I remember the morning of just taking a moment in my office and really getting my mindset, my heart, just everything in alignment because I just deeply cared about the people we were going to have these conversations with and really script it out so that they could really, hear, listen, and understand that we were going to be there for them through this next part of this journey for a period of time. And I sat down with the first person and he got up, he stood up, walked across the room and gave me the biggest hug. And I remember who hugs during a reduction in force conversation? But he said to me, he goes, Nicole, he goes, I have to tell you, I haven't been that happy. This actually allows me to go do what I really am most passionate about. So thank you for handling this the way that it's been handled. Thank you for, goes through this thing, right? But I know part of it was how I showed up for that meeting so that he could really hear, receive, and process this in a non-defensive way. So I'm curious what moves you used, because I guarantee what you did differently in that moment, Mark, is what changed it for the other people versus what they heard from their leaders in that room.
Yeah, I remember. Here's the whole deal. Whenever you terminate person, or I remember one time I had an employee, a great salesperson working for me again at a previous company, and I'd been able to get him a raise, pretty significant raise, great, and I was communicated it to him, and it was great. And then I found out that I communicated the wrong rate. It was less. It was ugly. Oh. And I remember very purposely saying, I got to go meet with him the next day. I got to go spend the day with him.
Right.
Meet him. And I'm nervous. I'm feeling sick. And you know what? He said, hey, that's okay. That's fine. At least you had the moxie, not to put it in a note for me, not to call me, but to physically come here and have this conversation face to face. And you know what I found is if you're genuine with people, if you're real with people, it's amazing how much easier those conversations are. Early on, when I was 16 years of age, I went to work for McDonald's. And a little later in life, when I was in college, I was managing the second highest volume McDonald's in the world. Yeah, in the world. 19 years of age. I can tell you so many brave conversations with people with handguns pointed at me that I had, and all kinds of different things. But what I found back then is when you did have to fire somebody, I would stress out over these things. I would stress out. And then you kind of get enough of these under your belt and you go, you know what? It always works out better. It always works out great for the person who's being terminated. And I had to also remember that the reason I'm doing this is because if I allow this person to stay, the people who are still there are going to say, wait a minute, if that person can do that and get away with that, I can get away with something too. And so you had to do that to kind of cleanse the flock a little bit. Kind of tough, kind of difficult. But once you get past that, once I got enough of those under my belt, hate to say it, they became easy because I realized that it's keeping it short, it's keep
Yeah.
tight, and realizing that, you know what, here's the next step, be very upfront with them. And for many of those people, you did wind up coming back and having another conversation with them.
Yeah.
Fine. Some people, from an HR standpoint, from a legality standpoint, we got to cut the cord right now. But for the vast
Yeah.
majority, I can tell you one that I was nervous as can be of. This is kind of a funny story. I was doing consulting for a holding company. They asked me to step into a company and work with the president of the company because we thought there was some theft, major, and there was. The
Yeah.
challenge with the president and the CFO were the two leading it. I mean, they were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh my goodness.
The challenge was the president kept a handgun on his desk. Literally kept a handgun on his desk.
Like,
Yeah. And it was in an open carry state. And I'd been tasked by the ownership of the holding firm to go in and remove this person, terminate.
yeah.
And it was funny because we had already called for security guards to have them on site. And one of the owners of the holding company said, "Hey, I'll go with you." Well, "I'll go with you" meant the person was going to stay in the parking lot. Sir,
Yeah.
really, really good. And
Yeah.
right, because from a safety standpoint, I couldn't terminate this person in the building, behind his desk. So I said, "We're going to Starbucks. We're going to Starbucks for coffee."
Yeah.
And that was just a total ruse to get him outside the door. Door
Sure.
locked behind us, and then standing right there, 2 feet outside the door, I terminated him and said, "No, you're not going back in. Period.
Yeah.
We will bring your car keys to you. We will bring your bag. We will bring everything to you." And I remember that one I was a little nervous on. I was a little because I said, "What? This guy has a handgun has on his credenza right behind his desk in his briefcase. Is he packing one also? I don't know." So
Right.
yeah, that was kind of weird.
Well, and so it's a great example of like you can control how you show up, right?
Yep.
All the planning, the mindset, all of the work, the scripting, the short, concise, the caring, but you can't control how the other person is going to show up. So I'll tell you many times because I knew what I could control, I would have security there as well, which is not a bad idea in the moving on conversations, especially when you're dealing with a volatile situation, which can happen a lot. But again, we can't control them. We can control how we show up. The other thing I want to really go a little bit deeper on that I thought was fascinating what you said, Mark, was the consequences of not having the conversation. So go a story back when you talked about like the consequences of not doing it, you saw it. So I want to take you back to the time where we jokingly tell people when we see them like how we met was you were in the midst of a difficult situation, right? That you knew you needed to take care of. You had not gotten HR's support in the past in dealing with these, and you knew firsthand the consequences of not
Mhm.
dealing with them. So I'd love to tee that story up from your perspective so our audience can hear this.
Yes. Well, because I mean, I had a person we needed to eliminate. We needed to remove this person, and HR was more concerned about, what if this person files a suit against us, yada yada yada, and yet this person was costing us money, and more importantly, the morale of the organization had to remove it. I had to find a way. And I still remember because you had an office in the back corner of the HR department. And I still remember coming down late one afternoon because I said, "I'm going to catch you kind of late in the day. I'm just going to kind of feel her out." So I think the next morning, man, I'm down there with the paperwork. "Here's what we got." And he goes, "Oh yeah, let's do it. Let's do it."
Yeah.
But I knew I had to because I was affectionately calling the HR department up to that time, the business prevention department.
Yeah.
And we had to remove this person because it just wasn't working. Here's the situation when managers don't have these tough discussions, and I don't care, it's not be a manager, employee, anybody. When you fail to have the tough conversation, it may be with a peer.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing? You're putting more stress on you because there's a reason you're having to have this is because the stress it's putting on you. It could be a family member. I mean, we've got an elderly parent in our family and multiple siblings and all dealing, and we don't all see eye to eye. And, got to have those conversations. And here's the whole thing. The outcome is never as bad as we think it is. Because many times it's just you know what? We're just not seeing things on the right angle. We're not seeing what they're seeing. And because again, you know what happens? We're making assumptions. We're
Mm-hmm.
some salespeople, I'm in sales today and I've been in sales my whole life, but salespeople are guilty of making assumptions. We're making assumptions. Well, this customer doesn't want to buy. This customer's not responding. We don't
Right.
know. We don't know until we have the conversation. You've got to be sure
It's
to have the conversation.
it's the stories we tell ourselves is what you're mirroring right there. It's the stories we tell ourselves. And oftentimes where HR gets in the way of this is the stories they tell themselves is, well, this person wants to work through a 90-day plan. They want to be a part of the organization. And a lot of times I'm like, and I would always bring the listen, I have to tell you, I think there's a conversation before any of that, which is like, to stay here, here's what you need to do. And if that's not going to work, then let's talk about what transitioning out can look like. By the way, we'll still own control of that. I don't, for anybody listening, don't think we're going to let them write what the transition out looks like. But there's ways to do it. I call it the fork in the road conversation, right? Like, here's your two choices. And to stay, here's what this is going to have to look like. I want to be
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
explicit. Or let's talk. Hey, it's okay if it's not a good fit for you. You don't have to work through a silly 90-day plan or this or that. Let's talk through it. And it usually lights a fire one way or the other. And it's clear. And they appreciate having a choice in the matter. So they're not faking it and then getting back down into another issue. And so when you brought me that challenge that day, Mark, I remember it being very well thought out, sound. The evidence was super clear and probably arguably at that point, if I remember right, it was long overdue. So it was a no-brainer, right? A
Well,
no-brainer.
I needed you to come to work for the company so I could have a voice there. You God, it was good people.
Well, you're gonna laugh about it. My son Joe, right about this time frame period, like within 6 months of this, at school, Joe announces to the class when their answer, he had to have been like fourth or fifth grade. And they announced to the class, like, oh, what do your parents do? And he announces in front of his entire class in elementary school, my mom fires people. And the teacher called me and was like, Nicole, I have to let you know, like, this is what was shared. So if you get any calls from parents or like all this, and I was just like, Joe. So I remember having to come home and like say to Joe, like, oh, mom's not firing. These are people who are getting in trouble and doing not so good things at work. And I had to relate it to him because I thought, oh my gosh, it's the last thing I think him, right? Like, honestly, we're not fired. They're firing themselves. We're just following through on the process for them to move on and move along.
That's a funny story. Something you got to keep in mind, the sun's still going to come up in the morning. We sit
Yeah.
there and I mean, the number of people I fought have terminated over the years,
Yeah.
far too many to count. And you know what?
Yeah.
Sun still comes up the next morning. The first couple times
Yeah.
you go through it, yeah, it's difficult, it's awkward. But then you realize, you know what? You're doing them a favor. Because
Yeah.
here's the thing. So many times if a person's in the wrong position, they're not comfortable, they're not happy.
No, no.
And what you're doing is you're just helping them get to the next opportunity, which invariably is probably going to be much better. And
Yeah.
so both sides are going to win. And that's the whole thing. The key with any of those having a brave conversation, you got to go in with a level of confidence. Because if you go in and that you're not confident and you're not sure yourself, if you are going up against a strong individual, they will eat you alive. They will
Yeah.
absolutely take you down. Funny story. I'll never forget this. I'm sitting in the Admirals Club in San Francisco Airport years ago. And there's two people having a conversation. One's a supervisor, one's a manager, and one's the employee. And it's obvious that, the manager flew into town or the employee flew into town to get fired. And this conversation just kept dragging out. And myself and a few other people were like, just fire the person. I mean, they're thinking it's like, I mean, this was better than a in-flight movie.
Yeah. With you, Mark, you're bringing up such a good point because when we don't sit down and process the conversation, script it out, think about the key points we want to make, how we want to end with that accountability and action, and even a good conversation starter. So many people think they're good at speaking off the cuff. Like, I'm good at these, right? And so they put zero into it. And then they come into this weird, like, I'm going to repeat it 20 times or not respond right. Or, ooh, this surprised me. I didn't think about it. Well, it's because you didn't do the work. If you do the work, you will come into the conversation so much more confidently, which is what you're talking about.
Right. Because if they start pushing back, you've got to know it. You got to believe so confidently. This is the reason why. This is boom, boom, boom. You've got to believe. It's funny. I tell salespeople, your mindset going into a sales call predetermines the results you get coming out. Guess what?
Yeah.
Same thing applies here in having a great conversation. Your mindset going into that conversation predetermines the results you get coming out. So if you haven't done the preparation, if you haven't done the homework, if you haven't done all that, guess what? This thing could go awry and it's going to be very ugly. And you know what? You're going to wind up walking out more stressed than you did going into it because you blew it.
Here's the other thing that research shows, not only the mindset, but if you approach it with a positiveness, just a little, not that you're sitting there going, okay, guess what? I'm going to let you go. But you have an element of positivity to your tone and to your voice and how you're approaching it. It changes how it comes. It changes for the person receiving it. And that's an element that really helps.
It sure does, because so many times what happens is we get so focused in on the short term. We get focused in on the immediate. And
Yeah.
we fail. We're so close to the tree, we don't see the forest. We've all seen employees like this, employees that we're
Yeah.
having a difficult conversation with. They don't realize that there's a much bigger world out there.
Yeah.
Especially if you're having to do this to somebody who's been around 20 years or,
Yes.
25 years. They're like, I've never worked anywhere else. Well, you know what? You really didn't work here. You picked up a paycheck, but you weren't doing it. You have to come in with this positive attitude. Right? The sun will still come up in the morning. This is not
Yeah.
the end of the world. In fact, I remember I got fired from a couple jobs early on. My first two sales jobs, I got fired from both. And both of them turned out to be absolutely the best things for me. First one I got fired from got me to the second job. Okay, I still got fired from that job. But you know what? That ultimately got me to the third job where I spent 12 years with a company and had incredible success and loved it. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he said, you have to go in on every job viewing that you're going to be fired because sooner or later
Yeah.
you are going to be fired.
Mm.
Job as if you're going to be fired. And okay, that's a little bold and rash, but you know what? It is fine. Don't be afraid. If you believe this is the right decision, this is how you're supposed to run this project, do it. Because if you do get fired, it's okay. I'm not saying that to do immoral behavior or unethical behavior, but there are times, in your job, if you're in a management position, thought leader position, that you're going to do things that you say, you know what, we've got to go in this direction, period. Believe it. Yeah.
It was a form of a TED Talk for a group. And the title I titled it was, It's Okay to Get Fired Every Once in a While. Because I really wanted to challenge the stigma of, like the pure terror and what am I going to tell my family and friends and the shame around getting fired. And so I was like, it's okay to get fired once. What if it was okay to get fired every once in a while? And to really flip the script on that. And because I do believe, similar to what you're talking about, that it is okay. Not everything was meant to work out. And it doesn't give us a chance to really experiment, right? And try new things if we carry that fear and potential shame with us. The other thing I want to mention, and I so appreciate is going deep on the moving on conversation because so many people don't want to talk about it. But in the 5 Tough Talks, we talk about if you get really good at the first 3, the how we work, right? The getting aligned, the making asks for help, permission, or acknowledgement, and then even having the what's going on conversation when you're noticing a shift in their behavior or performance or a shift in your relationship with them, that will have a lot less of the being better and the moving on conversations. So many times in my one-on-one coaching, I have leaders coming to me with this like, oh, heck moment, because they have to have the being better conversation and they've not laid the foundation for any other conversations. And now they're scared. And then, at that point, it's probably going to turn into a moving on conversation. But if we get really good at the first 3, we will have less of the being better and the moving on. And if we do have to have it, we're pros because we've done all the other ones.
Yeah. Something we have to be careful of. It is very easy for people to make false assumptions. Even with my own team, I will send out a note to my team. Hey guys, we got to get together tomorrow, 2:00, whatever. And I have 4 people on my team and we got to go through some, and I always end it with, okay, ... life is good. Just because I don't want anybody panicking. I mean, I'm sure they don't, but I just want to be safe. Life is good. Nobody's going to get, because, there have been times when something hasn't gone right or something, we got to make a correction in something, realign some job assignments and so forth. And just relax, just relax. Life is good. We'll get through it. Because again, people can draw assumptions from comments. This is so fatal. CEOs see things through one lens and they have no clue as to how it's being received down on street level. Entrepreneurs, founders of companies I have a whole thing what I call the founder's dilemma. Founders of companies believe that their product is absolutely the greatest thing in the world. And they have no clue as to how their communication is being perceived by the employees that they have, because they don't quite see it that way. They don't see the baby quite as beautiful as they do. Yeah.
Love it. So Mark, tell us one thing you're most excited about for 2025 for you, your business, your team.
Yeah, it's something I've really had a belief in, and I'm really going strong on it. And that is, if you have the ability to help someone, you owe it to them to reach out to them. This comes back to this whole thing of prospect. This is a brave conversation. Salespeople, you got to get a hold of people who don't know you. Oh no, that's that brave conversation. But I'm really going down this road, rolling out some programs, rolling out some things to help people see that they can and need to get in touch with these. If you know you can help someone, you owe it to them to reach out to them, even if they don't know you. Does that have shades of a cold call? I'm not saying it's a cold call, but it's a warm call. It's an unknown call. But that's a brave conversation that too many salespeople are not willing to have. And that's a big focus of where I'm putting my effort this next year to help people realize that they can. Side note real quick, because sales is not something you do to people. Sales is what you do for people.
Yeah. Well, and I've always appreciated your relationship-based focus on you build the relationships and the sales come, right? And you're very good at that, which makes it just easy to work with you, which I've always appreciated.
Yeah. And I've never had to fire you. So you've never had.
Good. Thank you, Mark, for that. So for the listeners, think about what's one small, brave move you would suggest to a listener to make to move into a stronger 2025 with your sales experience, your sales expertise. What's one small, brave move you would suggest to them?
Hey, you know what? Don't do it by way of email. Oh, you got keyboard courage. Excuse me. Come on, people. Get the phone, call them, getting face to face. I mean, it's too many people. They're afraid to have the brave conversation, so they text it out or they email it out. No, come on. Go face to face. See some.
I love it.
Have a conversation. It's amazing how much better everybody will feel.
Mark, if people want to find you or spend more time with you or work with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
In your HR office. No, it's thesaleshunter.com. That's the best way to reach me. That's the best way to find me. And of course, I'm all over LinkedIn, YouTube, got some books out, but just go to thesaleshunter.com. And you can type that into anything, whether it be a search engine, whether it be a podcast. Again, I got a couple. Hey, if you can't find me, something's wrong.
You have great content out there, which we so appreciate. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us on the Small Brave Moves podcast today and having the courage to talk about the most difficult conversation, the moving on one.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.